um, so hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, whether it's nighttime, evening, early morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being here for the first of the 3 paper talk sessions for Dementia Lab 2021. First of all, I'd like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. So if you notice that kind of red little circle flashing in the top left-hand corner, that just means that this session is being recorded and it will be available for later viewing on our website, so dementialabconference.com. And I'd also like to ask everyone to please mute themselves if you haven't already. So on the bottom left-hand corner for most people, that'll be where you can click on a little mute button. And if you do not want your video recorded, please turn off your camera. Today, we will be having 5 paper talks, as you can see on the slide that's being shared right now. Each paper talk presentation will be about 10 minutes long, and then at the very end, we'll have a 30-minute Q&A session. So everyone that's attending today, if you could hold on to your questions and then type them in the chat box at the end, that would be great. And you will have an opportunity to ask the authors the questions directly, or I can ask them on your behalf as well if you'd rather that. Many of these talks are associated with papers that will be in a proceedings, and they're not quite available yet, but we will email all attendees when they're ready and available to read. And before I introduce the authors and their work, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Paulina, and I'm one of the people who has helped to organize the conference this year. I am in Vancouver, Canada, but I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on, and Emily Carr University is situated on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the reason why we are doing these land acknowledgements, and you may have noticed that you've heard a few land acknowledgements throughout the conference, you've attended some of the sessions earlier. We do these acknowledgements to recognize whose land it is that this conference would have been taking place on had it been in person. And I'd like to bring attention to the enduring relationship that these nations have with their territories, remember and acknowledge the history of colonization on these lands and the continued systemic issues that Indigenous peoples face here, including systemic racism and unequal access to healthcare. With this information and knowledge, it's important to contextualize our own work and the roles that we have within our own communities. And this conference can be a really wonderful opportunity to keep this in mind as you listen to and hear from presenters from all around the world throughout the conference to better contextualize the work that is being shared with you. So I'll go ahead and introduce the presenters for the day. First up, we've got Emma Dixon, and she'll be speaking about lessons learned from remote user-centered design with people with dementia. And then we'll have Carolyn Kirchhoff speak about designing dementia care, materialized knowledge at the Sonweed Care Home. Gail Kenning and her team will speak about an immersive art-based approach to engaging with the embodied, sensory, and affective experience of living with dementia. Lisa Bolton and Kaylee Raber will speak about scaling participatory methods for cultural change in long-term care homes. And then we'll have Claire Brophy and her team speak about We Need to Talk, collecting and using life stories in care. So with that, I will hand it over to Emma Dixon. And I see we've still got more people coming in. I hope that, I don't know if everyone can hear the doorbell every time, but Emma can go ahead and take over the screen share. Thanks, Nadia.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. And you can hear me even better. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Emma Dixon. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland, College Park in the US. And today I'll be giving a talk on behalf of our team on the lessons learned from remote user-centered design with people with dementia. Okay, so remote user-centered design methods are especially important in dementia research, as many people living with dementia are over the age of 65 and therefore are at a much higher risk of suffering severe illness from COVID-19. This makes in-person research often unsafe for the foreseeable future. Additionally, remote methods facilitate completing studies in the home environment, which is particularly useful in dementia, given the importance of contextual cues and routines. So past research in user-centered design has included people with dementia in remote interviews and field trials. And to our knowledge, researchers have yet to translate co-design online, which may be due to the focus around interactions with physical design materials and prototypes. Not only is co-design challenging to translate online, but past research has also identified unique challenges to designing with people with dementia, such as difficulties with abstract thinking, verbal communication, and brainstorming design ideas. In this work, we present a case study of the use of remote methods for a user-centered design process. Our case study centers around the design of scheduling and reminder systems, which is a popular area of technology design for people with dementia. Our process includes interviews, low-fidelity prototyping sessions, and asynchronous evaluation of prototypes with tech-savvy individuals with mild to moderate dementia. And we also include a discussion of the benefits and challenges of using this method. So we had 4 people living with mild to moderate dementia participate in this study. As you can see in this table, different participants were involved in different phases of this project, with Joe being the only participant who was involved in an interview, a co-design session, and the video evaluation. I'll note that all of our participants were technologically savvy. This, in addition to all participants being in the early stages of dementia, likely smoothed our ability to do the technological steps I will describe. So I'll now walk you through our method. The figure at the bottom of the slide is meant to provide an overview of the method that we followed for this work. So next I'll describe each of these steps in this process. We first conducted 4 remote empathizing interviews with the goal to understand participants' use of scheduling and reminder systems, as well as the challenges they experience with these systems. We used these interviews to scope our co-design scenarios. We then conducted in-person affinity diagramming, where our team grouped our interview notes to reveal emerging themes most relevant to the design problem. The affinity map we created was using Miro boards. We then conducted an in-person brainstorming session where we sketched out the design ideas expressed by participants in the empathizing interviews. The example provided in this slide was put forward by our 3rd participant, Rose. It depicts a user writing reminders on sticky notes and then taking a picture of the sticky note with their phone, and this reminder being automatically updated on their digital calendar. After sketching out all relevant design ideas expressed by participants, we then conducted in-person design critique to limit the number of designs proposed in the co-design session with a participant with dementia. During this phase, we created a Google Doc that we would share with participants in the next phase. In the Google Doc, we formed 3 primary design questions, each with 2 preliminary design ideas to critique and iterate. This was our way of providing context and structure to the following co-design session. We then moved on to the remote design session, which was conducted over Zoom, where researchers shared their screen with the participants on a call. For this remote co-design session, we had 2 researchers present. One was the lead and one was the note taker, and we had 1 participant with dementia. The session lasted about 1 hour and was audio and video recorded. The participant was asked before the session to have pencil and paper handy for sketching. Based on the design ideas and critiques shared in the co-design session, we developed a Wizard of Oz prototype using Adobe XD. We then recorded a 4-minute video enactment to showcase all of the various features of our proposed prototype. This video enactment was then shared with 2 of the original interview participants for asynchronous evaluation. The image in the slide is just a snippet of the video of our Wizard of Oz prototype. I'll now discuss some of our findings specifically related to the benefits and challenges of this method. The first benefit of this method is the decrease in barriers to utilizing digital tools by eliminating the use of non-familiar operating systems. For example, Amelia strictly uses Apple products. If our study had been in our lab, where we only have access to Windows products, this could have been a huge barrier for her participation. Additionally, using this remote method allowed participants to use their individualized technological accessibility configurations. For example, Joe uses a wall-mounted TV to magnify his computer screen when in his home office. This kind of individualized setup for participants would be extremely costly and difficult to recreate in a lab setting. Another benefit of the co-design session happened remotely was that participants in their home environment allowed them to not rely solely on their memory of their technology use. For example, when asked what other systems he used, Joe first looked around the room and then responded, "I have on the wall in the study a whiteboard that is divided up into days of the week and weeks of the month, and there's a cork board for pinning live letters." Had Joe not been in his home environment for the part of the study, he may not have remembered these non-technical strategies for. Though we did find the benefits I just described, there were also challenges that arose to using a remote user-centered design method. The first challenge we encountered with the remote method was in the difficulty with initial observation sessions and camera angles. As you can see in this video screenshot, one of our participants tried to demonstrate her use of a reminder app on her phone, but had to face the phone towards the conference call camera, which made it difficult for her to navigate and show us how she actually used that application. A related video challenge was explained in the video enactment of the prototype, where both Rose and Joe thought the video was overly complicated. This may be because we attempted to show all of the functions of the prototype in a 4-minute video. To overcome this confusion, Joe suggests to pick one specific example of a daily use and then show the example journey from the need for the system to set up to one use of the prototype in action. Another challenge we faced was in design participation. Although we were able to capture Joe's thoughts on each design, he did not sketch anything of his own. He did, however, still engage in co-design through critiquing certain aspects of the preliminary designs, as well as elaborating on it and suggesting new features for our original designs. But these design interactions were mainly verbal. Joe explains, "If we'd hit a point where I was trying to put something across and my words weren't capable of giving you a clear enough picture of what I was seeing in my head, then yeah, maybe being able to draw." We recognize that this is not an approach that will work for many, and we are iterating on our approach to engage people with dementia more actively in the design process. Now for a brief discussion on these findings. Our findings indicate that people in the mild stages of dementia may prefer less sensory-rich design interactions. For example, Joe preferred to relay his ideas verbally rather than drawing. But this may be due to the stage of the dementia he's in. As previous research argues, sensory-rich interactions are more important for people in more advanced stages of dementia. Additionally, the video was designed to be a sensory-rich depiction of the prototype, but it was perceived as overly complicated by both Rose and Joe. In regards to the asynchronous evaluation of our video enactment, we received the most negative and critical feedback during this phase. We think participants were more comfortable sharing criticism when they weren't giving that criticism directly to us as the designers. This could be one benefit of asynchronous interaction, which we previously avoided due to our work and the importance of real-time interaction. Although it is important to note that most of the criticism was on the accessibility and understandability of the video itself, rather than on the prototype. Reflecting on this constructive feedback of the video enactment, we believe there is potential in using high-fidelity prototypes for remote analysis. For example, click-through prototypes or conducting a cognitive walkthrough of a high-fidelity prototype may be better for an evaluation method. In a remote session, this could be done by participants taking remote control of the researcher's computer to evaluate a click-through prototype. In conclusion, our work indicates that remote methods may be a feasible approach to designing with some people with mild to moderate dementia, though more work is needed to understand, 1, how to remotely test working prototypes, 2, facilitate hands-on activities during the design process, and 3, broaden participants beyond tech-savvy individuals with dementia. So thank you all for listening to our talk and for this opportunity to present our work. Here's our contact information, and feel free to follow up with us for more information about our work. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. That was great. Carolyn, you can take over the share screen now if you wanted to.
I think we're still viewing Emma's screen.
Oh,
okay.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Carolyn Kirchhoff, and My talk tonight is about one specific care home for people living with dementia. That care home is called the Sonnweide. It's located in Wetzikon, Switzerland, and is home to over 155 people. My talk is based on research that I conducted during my MA thesis at ETH Zurich last winter. And so it, of course, describes the Sonnweide pre-COVID. And I hope in spite of that, that you can still glean some inspiration or maybe even some comfort from their approach. First, I'd like to give you some background about the unique history of the Sonnweide as a care home for people living with dementia. In Switzerland in the late 1980s, as in the rest of the German-speaking world, there were no homes for people living with dementia to move into when their care needs exceeded what their families could provide. The nursing homes open to other elders were neither built nor staffed to house people living with dementia. As a consequence, hospital emergency rooms were inundated with confused elders. Michael Schmieder was working as a nurse at such an emergency room at the hospital in Wetzikon. And when an opportunity arose for Michael to become the director of a nearby psychiatric asylum, he leapt at it and he began the process of transforming the Sonnweide into Switzerland's first dementia care home. With few models on which to base the Sonnweide concept, he began innovating. From the beginning, Schmieder worked closely with the architect Enzo Bernasconi, as well as with many other designers. I would like to point out, though, that as innovative as the Sonnweide was, and in many ways continues to be, it was not created in a bubble. Beginning in the 1980s, a transdisciplinary international knowledge network of carers, nurses, psychologists, designers, architects, and others began thinking about dementia care in different ways, and the Sonnweide is part of this international knowledge network. In my research, I'm inspired by the philosopher Annemarie Moll. Moll says that ontologies, in this case, the ontology is knowledge about dementia and care, are brought into being and sustained in day-to-day material practices. In other words, dementia is not only something that happens to us, it is also something that we do. At the Sonnweide, as at any care home, dementia is done by residents, visitors, carers, administrative staff, architects, interior designers, and many others. And doing dementia at the Sonnweide means doing things like going on walks, looking at plants, watching the seasons change, doing laundry together, laughing, listening to music, crying, being visited, being bathed in an accessible tub with mood lighting, commissioning artwork and flower arrangements, coordinating internships like the one I completed for my research, and so many other things. But doing dementia at the Sonnweide also means thinking about how the built environment can help sustain these activities. In their design process, Schmieder and Bernasconi take into account what they consider to be four common impulses of all people: the need to move, the need for conviviality, the need for sensory contact with the elements, and the need to be outdoors. Since the first living group was started in 1987, the Sonnweide's buildings and facilities have been continually expanded and renovated in order to better accommodate the people who live and work there. Two spaces in particular are materializations of care knowledge that was brought into being at the Sonnweide. I argue that the knowledge at work in these two spaces belongs to a material relational mode of ordering dementia, and I'll come back to that at the very end of my talk. But the two spaces I'd like to highlight are first, the never-ending loop, and second, the care oasis. So first, let's look at the never-ending loop, one of the Sonnweide's central design features. The loop is an uninterrupted system of paths and ramps through the Sonnweide campus, totaling 1.5 kilometers in length. It meanders through the Sonnweide's generous indoor and outdoor common spaces without a single flight of stairs. Falls were a problem at the Sonnweide in the beginning, and especially on stairs. So they decided to replace almost all of the stairs with ramps, like the one in this image. Completed in 2012, the path.
Your images, sorry, Carolyn.
Sorry, what?
Are you changing your slides?
Oh, do you see the never-ending loop?
No, I think I just see your home screen. You're the first slide.
Huh. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
Let
okay.
me try again. Okay. Share screen. Okay, you see the intro slide?
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. This was the literature review.
There you go. It's working now.
Okay, these were the images that you could have seen for the other part.
Thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out. And here's the never-ending loop images. Okay. So yeah, the path is wide and dotted with places where one can stop walking and rest, do an activity, and of course, spontaneously encounter carers and other residents. Snacks and cups of tea are distributed on ledges along the way. The natural elements, light, earth, and water, are integrated into the indoor spaces in various places, such as in skylights, gardens, and fountains. Built environments, as we all know, have the power to depathologize people's activities. The Sunvide's never-ending loop has changed the way the activity of walking is seen and experienced by the residents, carers, and others in the space. In a ward that feels institutional, with only the possibility of being able to walk back and forth in a hallway, for example, or just around a short loop, walking automatically becomes wandering. As Michael Schmieder says, if residents really want to walk, they need a lot of space to do it in. Reflecting on her experience working at another private dementia care facility in the canton of Zurich, the Sunvide's art and music therapist, Fiorentina Talamo, said that there, the residents had very little freedom to move. She described how, living in a ward with only one hallway, they encountered barriers at every turn, and how the effect that has is like a repetitive no. In contrast, she said, walking around the Sunvide is like a repetitive yes. Tom Kitwood wrote that the missing concept in dementia care was facilitation. Facilitation, that form of enabling provided by another person in order for acts to be accomplished and for a place to be reserved for them in the social world, requires that the gestures of the cared for person be acknowledged by another human being. Facilitation, in other words, is a way of supporting ability. Facilitation is a convivial, immaterial act, but it has to happen in a space. And that space has an effect on the way facilitation is practiced. With the concept of facilitation in mind, I would now like to show you the second space, the Care Oasis. The Care Oasis is a room for residents in the most advanced stage of dementia. In the late 1990s, Schmieder, together with his nursing staff and the architect Enzo Bernasconi, developed the concept for the Pflegeoase, the Care Oasis. It would be a shared room for 10 or so residents who had very high care needs. It was to combine sensory stimulation with togetherness. The first Sunvide Care Oasis opened in 2002, and a second was built in 2015. Each Care Oasis in the Sunvide is home to 11 residents. The beds are spread out in various angles and positions throughout a spacious L-shaped room. The interior designer chose deep, warm colors and natural central materials, a wooden ceiling, a granite fountain, felt-clad walls. There are soft things to touch, such as textured blankets and velour-upholstered couches. Another care oasis in Adenau, Germany, one of the dozens of care oases that have been inspired by the Sunvide, has been described as a Sinneswelt, which means a world of the senses. The room dividers and matching curtains are fold out of rolling cabinets, and they are built of wood and magenta textiles, and they're very easy to use, so it's possible to create private spaces if necessary. The shared space means that one hears the voices of other residents, employees, and visitors, and there's plenty of atmospheric noise, particularly around meal times. The granite fountain trickles in the background all day. The Care Oasis's large windows show a view of the landscape, a field behind which lies a forest, behind which one can see the Alps. There are birds and cows outside, and residents walking the loop occasionally pass by through the covered portico, which is visible through the large windows. A terrace is accessible through big glass doors through which carers and visitors can roll a resident in their bed. The idea of the Care Oasis is that the people in this phase of dementia would rather be in a group than be alone, explains Michael Schmieder. Advocates of care oases argue that they make spontaneous communication possible. In a care oasis, carers are always in the room to greet, respond to, and interact with residents. And in this way, the care oasis is thought to facilitate shared experience and a higher quality of communication between residents and carers. So in this talk, I looked at the never-ending loop and the care oasis at the Sunvide Care Home as materializations of knowledge about dementia. So now I'd like to come back to my claim that the knowledge at work in these two spaces belongs to a material relational mode of ordering dementia, not a medical one. It is based on a confluence of care, design, and other fields of knowledge. The medical anthropologist Ingan Moser argues that the science centrism of the way people often look at healthcare results in the granting of analytical privileges to biomedicine and means that alternative models of acting, such as in care, are disarticulated and made absent. At Dementia Lab, we refuse to grant biomedicine such analytical privileges. Articulating care practices, such as by describing how dementia is done in different spaces, is some of our most important work. This work is made all the more urgent by the COVID-19 pandemic because, as Moll argues, left unnamed and unexplained, all care practices are at risk of erosion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And now, Gail, if you'd like to share your slides, you can go ahead.
Okay, are you able to see my slides?
Looks good.
Good, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the work that we do, starting off with the field lab, the Felt Experience and Empathy lab. We're based in Sydney, and the core of the lab that we're doing is in relation to lived experience. So that's pretty much the focus of the work that we do, is to understand the lived experience, working with people who suffer stress, anxiety, trauma, and dementia. And so, and what is the impact of these conditions on people? The work I'm going to talk about is actually a piece that we made to try to understand and to share with other people that lived experience. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The lab is led by Sciento Professor Jill Bennett, and you can see the team are listed here. Now, I'm not going to have time to show the video, but there is a link here, and there are about 5 or 6 versions. And the artwork that we created, you can see in a video format, whereas it was created for a gallery space, and it was in a virtual reality, an immersive life-size screen, and is also available as an app to be downloaded on a phone or a tablet. So the visit is a immersive participatory artwork that explores what is the experience of having dementia. What is the experience, not from the clinical and medical, but from the experiential and the relational, and how people engage with each other. And you can also see the video at the courseofempathy.org, which is the website there. As we talk more and more about dementia, people start to understand a little bit more about it. People who have lived experience, either through a diagnosis of being a carer or in a professional circumstance, recognize some of the difficulties, but also some of the joys and experiences that happen with dementia. What we find for people who don't have that lived experience, much of their information comes from clinical and medical viewpoints or from media, so it's informational. And so while the pathologies of dementia are being increasingly understood by people, the lived experience of what it's like to live with dementia is misunderstood. And what we find so often is that people who are not aware of dementia or lived with dementia go straight to that idea of the condition of advanced dementia and assume that people with dementia are not able to make decisions, don't have agency, can't make choices. And so because of that tendency, what we find is that people with dementia suffer this stigmatization. So even when they are very able still, that they're often misunderstood, infantilized, told what to do, patronized. The diagnosis of dementia can cause confusion and distress for everybody impacted. So for the person with dementia, and what we know with dementia is that it is not a steady path. It is a sense of ups and downs, and at times people are feeling on top of things and in control, and at others not. So it's very, very confusing for everybody around. And it's certainly confusing for those people who may engage with people with dementia without experience. So when we think about more and more of our community have dementia, then more and more people in the community without experience are also going to engage with people with dementia and feel this sense of stress and anxiety. So we created this immersive artwork called The Visit, and it's the lived experience of a digital character who lives with dementia. The important thing here is that we worked really closely with 4 women who had vascular dementia, and we carried out a series of interviews with them, and we used their words to create a script, and the script is the dialogue that the character Viv voices. So the words are taken verbatim from the people living with dementia, and then they're voiced by an actor. And you can see one example here. The character Viv talks to the audience, to the viewer, about her hallucinations and confabulations. And rather than being afraid of them, or sometimes she's confused by them, but she's very much in control of them, and not all of the time. But these women were very able to talk about what it felt like to have a hallucination, what the hallucination was, where it came from, how they associated it, and how it was part of their life. So this is from a story of a woman who every so often her hallucination was that her shed had disappeared. And at one stage she had called the police to say, somebody's stolen the shed, and then it reappeared. And to stop her getting caught in this action each time, she set herself up with a strategy, which was the 30-minute rule. So when the shed disappeared, she simply waited 30 minutes, went and had a cup of tea, did something else, and then went and looked at the shed again. And then often she found the shed came back. The stories also talked about hearing a father typewriting, about bees, about seeing a father in the hallway and hallucinating him, but not being worried, not really being distressed by that. And Viv goes on to talk about her life, the carers that come in and look after her. And what we recognise with Viv is that she's witty, she's funny, she has agency, and she has charisma. We wanted to bring the 4 stories of the women together in a composite character, and that the composite character would reflect somebody who had dementia in their movements. So here we used an Australian actor to voice the character. We used motion capture. So in a sense, experts were brought in from all spaces to give this sense of life to the character. We asked the audiences to engage with Viv, and the important aspect here was in creating empathy. And this is what we were aiming to do with this piece, was cultivating empathy. So many immersive experiences start with the point of what does it feel like to have dementia, and we'll take you into that experience and you become this person. In cultivating empathy, and overcoming stigmatization, what we're trying to do is actually ask people to think about being with the person with dementia. And if people are not experienced, the first thing that they want to do is take over and say, look, I'll help you do that, or no, you shouldn't be doing this. Here, the role of the audience was to sit alongside Viv as she told her stories and listen and witness and experience deep listening. We carried out a series of evaluations with people as they either looked at the screen-based version or did the virtual reality. And in a sense, this measured the extent to which their empathy shifted. And this is why it was so important to have such a control over the character we created, to be able to express the stories and the people. So this is some of the behind the scenes of creating this character. And there's some really interesting work that we drew on around this digital character that has an element of realism, and sort of working with ideas around the uncanny valley. But at what point do people forget the digital character and go with what Viv is talking about? And to what extent is Viv still this other character that is frightening in the same way that dementia is frightening to those people? So from the, we carried out a whole series of evaluations, including a visual matrix, which is a psychosocial engagement that I did a workshop on yesterday, and I see some people in the audience from that, and used comprehensive state scales, and then this change in emotional distance. And this is the aspect that we're really looking for, is by engaging directly with people with dementia in the creation of this, bringing them all the way through, but then also working with people who are able to communicate, not information, but engage with affect, engage with feeling, and actually really bring to the audience members that sense of, how do I feel about dementia? Not what I know. And how do I engage with somebody with dementia? And what is my role alongside this person, as opposed to, I need to find out all the information I can, then I'll know what to do with them. So it's very much an empowering piece about thinking about the person with dementia and attempting to empower that position, overcome stigma, overcome that sense of fear that people have, and really cultivate empathy in the community. And from the evaluation, we could see this was starting to happen. So these are some of the resources that we drew on, and I'm very happy to answer questions. And if there's any time later, I can give you the links again to go and have a look at the work. But in a sense, this is very much about a participatory place and trying to understand that lived experience. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. I can hand it over to Lisa and Kaylee, like the virtual claps.
Okay, let me get my, hello everyone. Oh, shoot, let's not start at the ending. Okay, are we all here? Can you see my screen? Do that check first. I've learned this.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all. This is a presentation that I'm doing on behalf of the Health Design Lab at Emily Carr. It was done in collaboration with Vancouver Coastal Health Authority Long-Term Care, and it's about scaling participatory methods. It has taken place over the past 3 years. So what I'll be talking about is much more of a story arc of what this process has been, in the way that there have been dozens of workshops, there have been hundreds of people, and there have been multiple methods used. So I'm looking forward to having email conversations or even conversations after the presentation. So what we're hoping to do is scale the participation of people living in long-term care homes such that we can influence the culture there. Now, this is driven largely because clinical practices weren't necessarily improving care for a large community of people living with dementia in these care homes. So how can we scale the participation of all of these people and do that in collaboration with people administering health in a way that's sustainable? So 10 minutes or less. I'm trying to slow down my talking, but I am already a fast talker, so hopefully I can get this in there. We'll go through what the project goals were, some of the barriers that we faced, how participation can facilitate this transformation within culture that can inform strategy for health leaders, and what scaling participation looked like for us. So our goal was really to shift from this patient-centered view of care to a person-directed model of care. So what does that look like? I mean, the patient really embodies a sense of unwellness, whereas the person encompasses so much more of the human, which already opens up the gates for us to work in a lot more kind of utilitarian space. And the idea of directed, that a person in care should be able to form the care circle around them. They have influence and agency in that space. So the systemic barrier, which we're also encountering, of course, is this thing that the homes, long-term care homes, certainly here in Vancouver, are largely influenced or constructed under a kind of hospitalized style system, which is hierarchical and task-based, which services clinical needs really well. I mean, if you want decision support, if you want to make sure that the most people are getting the most care possible, great. But once you move into the space of a long-term care home, of course, this is where people live. I mean, if you look around the space that you have here, there's objects that are meaningful to you that kind of speak to your personal history. You either just had breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on where you are, and that's influenced by the kind of care needs that you have for yourself. And there's probably also tasks that you have that you're responsible for in your home. Now, all those things kind of move away when you go into a long-term care home, and it leaves people with not really a strong sense of purpose and not really a strong sense of self necessarily in that environment. So we're trying to move from what is a very linear process of innovation in healthcare, which is based on empirical research, data, basically history, creating future. Now that gives a lot of assurance to health leaders to say, we've done this research, we have these numbers, we're going to try to get from A to B using these different steps, and you'll be able to measure my performance based on that progression. Well, that's wonderful, and it's important to have that so that safe change is created within care systems. However, it doesn't leave a lot of space for transformation, and that's largely because it doesn't include comprehensively experiential data, which I've heard come up a bunch of times, which makes my heart explode. So what is this experiential data, and how does that mess with this linear system that is classic innovation in healthcare? Well, it gives space for divergency and complexity. So complexity within the system is the thing that creates inclusion. We need to make space for this complexity, but it makes a big, messy space, as many of us who work in design know. And so I just want to take a moment and kind of commend the VCH leaders that we worked with, Vancouver Coastal Health, who are willing to take a risk, because basically we were creating a big mess of information, doing a bunch of different workshops, listening to the voices of people living in care homes, creating different stories, using creative methods to create those stories. And we didn't know exactly where we were going because it was driven by the people living in the care home. This is making space for an emergent culture to be exposed. And it's not something that the traditional medical system validates within people's performance. There's not really metrics around that support that kind of transformation, but we knew that this was the kind of shift that we were looking to make. So what does that look like? Well, it started a couple of years ago with 6 different workshops with 6 long-term care homes, about 46 people, in a kind of co-led facilitation with the Vancouver Coastal Health Dementia Care Team and the Health Design Lab, asking really simple questions like what good care looked like for people. And a lot of stories emerged that were very kind of indicative of different directions that we could be moving in. Things like activities can give a boost, but relationships can give purpose. That so much of what is seen as like entertainment activity in care homes isn't really giving people those personal rewards. Or I need someone who gets me, who helps me to remember the things that I still can do. So of course, being seen for the things that are possible instead of for simply your ailments or this kind of patient box that people are held in. And so we resolved on these 5 different core themes. So these have led the work that in the 2 years that have passed this initial set of 6 workshops. They are, you may be familiar with one of them, recognizing and supporting ability, a sense of purpose. So this is, again, is kind of like, well, within your home, there's things that you have to do. I have meaning here. Relationships and conversations. So this is where, how is actually having a conversation seen as a valuable thing within a care setting beyond just what are your vitals, this kind of thing. Individual needs and care. So if I have an interest, if I'm curious to host a like mocktail night, how can we facilitate that kind of thing? And then the final one, flexibility and spontaneity. How do you make space for spontaneous things to occur within that space as well? So we came up with the 5 themes. That was fantastic. But then we thought, okay, so now we've engaged 6 homes. How do we get this out to 55 care homes in a meaningful way that we're actually getting it to the people living in the care homes and speaking in a way which people can understand it? So we decided to do 2 different things. We made a animated set of videos that described the 5 themes, narrated and spoken by people living in care homes, literally reciting the quotes from what we collected from those initial settings or initial kind of workshops. And the other side of that was that we created a PowerPoint presentation as a companion to that video. So the video is available on YouTube. We have it narrated in English and in Cantonese. It's designed with the idea of people that have visual or auditory difference. And the PowerPoint presentation was really to be used by the care homes so that they could introduce these videos to folks living in the home, and also to start dialogue around where those kind of themes sat with people and where they saw it presenting in their own life. And part of the idea there was that we wanted them to be adaptable. We wanted to use a format, PowerPoint, classic healthcare, where they could go in there and adapt it to the unique needs of their care home. And even in doing the review itself, to kind of understand, where do I see this resonating in my home, and supporting those dialogues moving forward. So we have the videos, we have the PowerPoint presentations, and then in October of 2019, we had a huge launch event. So it's about 120 people in this space. Remember that? And we launched the videos and the facilitation guide. We did that again in partnership with Vancouver Coastal Health. And the idea here is that we're creating a level of sustainability by sharing these skills of co-design and facilitation with people working in health, so that they can continue these kinds of practices and become familiar with making that part of their own patterns. So we introduced the video, the PowerPoint presentation, and then we had a series of 3 activities, which all these people could also bring back into their homes to run with people living in the care homes. Now, systemic barrier, there were nobody at this event. There were no people at this event that were people living in care homes. So we were still kind of confronting this thing of, we as independent researchers could go into the care homes and co-design these different activities, but getting them out for the actual launches was still a challenge. So we knew that that was something we still needed to kind of tackle. I'll go back one, sorry. So we launched this event, and all the Vancouver Coastal Health folks take these out to their care homes. They're playing the video, they're asking the different questions. And while that's happening back at the Health Design Lab, we started designing a game largely influenced by Lab for Living's Life Cafe called The Time Traveler. So the idea here was, okay, so we're getting the information out. People know about this message of the 5 themes. How can we start to get it on the ground so people are having discussions within the care homes and really starting to develop what that unique culture is within each home? So this game kind of promotes reminiscing activities and takes you back in time, transported by an object, and then kind of calls you to bring yourself back into time and into the current time and understand how that value or that sense of self is expressed in your current world in the care home, or if it isn't, how you would like to see that expressed. Within the context of the game, there's different documentation tools that connect in with time travel or going on a trip, so that over time, each care home can deliver or can start to develop a bit of a picture of what necessarily their unique culture looks like. So where can they start to move forward in this case of lifting up the voice of the people that live there and understanding which direction they'd like to move in. So got it ready to go, going to have 55 kits ready to go. Going to have a 300-person launch event on March 26th. And you can guess that did not happen. That did not happen. So it's supposed to be finally all the people break down that barrier, showing up for the event, and COVID happened. So since then, we have kind of switched this around to a virtual format, which I'm very encouraged by, because I think the sense of meaningful engagement over virtual environments is incredibly important right now, of course. And we're going to do a workshop about that next Thursday if you're curious to learn more about that one. So we pivoted to family. So what happened, at least here in British Columbia, is people in care homes are really being kept quite safe, and at the same time, people don't have access to them, including ourselves. And so we pivoted to family, and we're doing more work in terms of workshopping, co-designing, ideas for connecting. I will post to the bulletin board, which is associated with the Dementia Lab conference, both the videos and this ideas for connecting guide, because I think it's just really helpful for folks, even just to share on a personal level. I know a lot of us have people in care homes right now. I'm just going to end with this, which is what I end the presentation off for that big launch event, that I feel like if anything, I've learned that anything is possible right now, like anything is possible. And that doesn't just include all the horrible things. And I really want to hold on to that. I hope we can all hold on to that together. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. And we've got our last presentation. Oh, there we go. Claire, you're already ahead of me. Awesome.
Unmute. Hi, everyone. Okay, here we are. Everybody, let me just get this going, right? Right, we good? Okay. Thanks, everyone. It's been really lovely to hear all of your talks just now. And I think some of the things that I'm going to talk about in the next little while will connect to a lot of those things, particularly some of the stuff Lisa just presented around those feeling cards, around sense of self. I quite like the mocktails night. I think I'm probably more of a cocktails night kind of person. And Carolyn mentioned Kitwood. Gail mentioned assumptions and stigmatization. So there's a lot there that I'll talk a little bit about here. So before I get going, I'm speaking to you from Australia. So I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations owners of the land where the Queensland University of Technology now stands. I pay respects to their elders, lords, customs, and creation spirits, and recognize that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. And I encourage you, wherever you are, to perhaps reflect on the traditional owners of the land upon which you now stand, as Paulina sort of guided us with at the beginning. So the paper I'm going to talk a little bit about today, I'm just trying to move my Zoom stuff. The paper I'm going to talk a little bit about today is called Designing Conversations Using Life Stories to Improve Dementia Care. So there was a group of us that did that. I'm going to speak on behalf of a few. My colleague Thea Blackler is sitting in the room with me here, and John and Kaylee are online as well. So the theoretical perspective of person-centered care is where this paper was sort of grounded in. And I'm sure there's a lot of people at the conference that will be able to speak with much greater depth on this topic than I will, and I'm sure you'll hear about it elsewhere, as you have already here today. So I won't expand on it too much, but as an overview, person-centered care is an approach to care that acknowledges the importance of self and identity, regardless of cognitive ability. So saying that even in a person with dementia, a sense of personhood and a sense of connection with your identity is not lost to the disease, but is perhaps concealed by the disease. Some attempts have been made to incorporate things like life histories and those experiences into care, but they're generally ineffective or they aren't used effectively. So with this in mind, the approaches that we talk about in this paper used design methods to improve the collection, use of person-centered knowledge, and improve the communication and personalization of dementia care. Now, the paper includes 2 case studies, one conducted in Australia and case study 2 conducted in Canada. Today, I'm only talking about case study 1. However, yesterday you may have attended Kaylee's workshop around the work that she did in the Perspectives case study, and she's also doing another one next week, or tomorrow. So I encourage you to go along and attend that as well if you'd like to hear a little bit more about that perspective. And we're doing a workshop at the end of next week. So if you are interested in some of the things I talked to you about today, please come along and help us continue this. So the case study 1 is called Knowing the Person. And in that we sought to understand how person-centered care and person-centered knowledge was used in the various environments that people with dementia find themselves across the care system. It included 3 studies. So first we talked to healthcare professionals, then we did some content analysis and online discussion forum, and we did observations, unobtrusive observations in a care facility. And that all led to this kind of conceptual card development, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. But first I want to tell you kind of the inspiration behind this. This is me and my dog. And we trained at the time, just before this study started, we were working as a therapy team in an aged care facility. So I went to training with Kina, and we trained with the Delta Society that train dogs to be therapy dogs. And they assess whether you're suitable for a children's hospital or aged care. And my dog Kina was kind of, deemed to be more suitable for the calming environments of aged care. So we had already been going to an aged care facility near our home every Sunday morning. And as a volunteer, I would take these notes. So I carried this little book around with me. And whenever I kind of got snippets of information about the individuals that I was meeting, sometimes it came in passing from comments, sometimes it was maybe a random thing in their room. But if I knew that Doreen had 2 daughters, or Eileen had greyhounds, or William did Bible studies and worked at the Salvation Army for like 50 years, that would give me an in to more meaningful connections and conversations. So that's kind of where this the inspiration for the project came from. So the first study was interviews with healthcare professionals. So that was a director of a memory care facility in the United States. It was a manager from Alzheimer's Australia here, as well as a nurse unit manager in Australia and a paramedic. And that gave us a kind of a nice perspective on lots of different sort of places where people with dementia may find themselves. From the analysis of the interviews, we kind of came up with 3 themes, or with 6 themes. But person-centered care was evident in all of those, even if the participants didn't refer to it as that. They talked about being able to use information like knowing the guy knew how to fish or whatever, and being able to improve their care or reduce behavioral issues or whatever it may be. But they all also suggested that it was inconsistent, that kind of information. The way it was provided was unstructured or messy or this kind of thing. So that kind of helped us move forward with that sort of understanding of that kind of information. Then we did a content analysis of an online discussion forum hosted by the Alzheimer's Society in the UK. So we introduced ourselves to the admin before signing up to the forum, and we took part in the most popular thread of the forum on that online forum, and it was general information for support for people with dementia and their carers. So it was kind of giving us a first-hand perspective of what that would be like. And we only reviewed the initial post of each thread, and we didn't take any personal information. So it removed any kind of ability to identify who was part of the forum. But 8 topics seemed to emerge from the things that people were talking about. And transition to facilities were identified as the hardest part of the dementia journey. They often came at the last minute as a result of rapid deterioration or crisis, and people were unprepared. So there was a lot of talk about finding long-term care facilities and how do you assess how do you decide whether they were a good facility or not. And a lot of the commentary was around the recognition of they were aware of the use of personal knowledge about their loved ones, and they knew that it had a positive impact on their care, and they had high opinions of facilities that were able to use that kind of knowledge and recognize individual needs. But at the same time, like the experts in the previous work, it was the use of that information, the way it was collected and shared, was unreliable, and often it was just thrown away, even if it was provided, or for the personal carers, they didn't have the time to get that information in the first place and then figure out how to be able to hand it over to the long-term care facility. And then the last one was the observations that I talked to you about at the very beginning. So the building that I visited, unlike the one Carolyn described earlier, was really old, and it has since been demolished. But what became apparent over the course of my visits was that the physical appearance of the building played a far less role in the care of the residents when it was compared to the knowledge used by the staff during their interactions with residents. So when the staff were able to say, Eric used to live on a farm, or Hazel had dogs growing up, that gave me an in to a meaningful connection with that person, and to stimulate that kind of conversation with them. In many instances, residents would become more animated and more lucid, and this would last for a long time through the conversations. But generally, again, it was just my luck in getting this information. Most of the times the rooms were not personalized, and it was kind of up to me to kind of find that information. There was no structure in being able to give it to a volunteer. So overall, we found that while person-centered care was seen as valuable and improving a person's care, the methods of collecting and using person-centered care or person-centered knowledge were inconsistent and ineffective. So we were wondering how we might improve the availability of personal information about people living with dementia for care providers and services. And the aim was for it needed to be as accessible as possible. So this is the concept. It's a set of cards, not unlike the feeling cards that that Lisa just talked about, right? So essentially there are 10 themes, and the 10 themes are a starting point from which to begin exploring a person's life history. Within the 10 themes, there are upwards of 150 cards, as well as our research findings, which talked about emotional needs, familiarity, environmental preferences, daily activities and routines. The themes were derived from several other sources. So Dementia UK's Life Story template, the Alzheimer's Society This Is Me leaflet, but also from autobiographical interviews and the way oral life history interviewing was conducted at the through the Smithsonian Institute. So essentially, the idea is that this set of cards would be given to the person on diagnosis, which would give the family time to start having these conversations. So the intention is that it's to stimulate conversation with the family before cognitive decline. And then the cards would travel with the person into their care facility and be able to kind of speak for them when they were no longer able to speak for themselves. So they were also motivated by family leisure activities and card games where people used to sit around the table and talk to each other. So it was about stimulating meaningful conversation, but the hope is that it would become more than just a game, and that it would become a record of information and a way to deeply connect with that person for other people, for volunteers or for paramedics or for professional caregivers. So the feedback we've had anecdotal feedback from the concepts, and it's all generally been quite positive. People have said that some of the questions can be quite sensitive or triggering. And there are a lot of unanswered questions that we have, particularly, given the advances in technology. So this is what they kind of look like at the moment. But given advances in technology, is this the best way to distribute? How do we distribute them? Is this the best way? The cards have questions on the front and a space for answers on the back. And you would sit and write something about that person as you were talking, to some keywords. Is this the best way for us to collect that information? Is it the best way to distribute and share that information? Next week we're hosting a workshop, and I encourage you, if you think this would be something of interest to you, please join us, because we'd like to work through some of those questions. Are the questions we have on the cards right? Are there more creative ways we might go about sharing this information across the care environment? That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Claire. And thank you to all the presenters. It's pretty cool. I got kind of a sneak peek when all the submissions were coming in, but to actually hear about all of this from your voices, even though it's virtual, is pretty cool. So thank you. So now if anyone has got any questions, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box, just kind of in the bottom center of the Zoom screen. And I'll just pick them one by one, and then if you want to read them out yourself, then you can go ahead and do that, or I can ask it for you. I'm also going to put a link for the bulletin board that Lisa mentioned, and you can share anything that you want there. It'll be monitored daily, and then you can comment anonymously or with your name, and share pretty much anything that you want. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? It's already 7:00 p.m. for me, so I know East Coast people, it's 10 p.m.
Can I just make a comment to say go us? Those were all such fabulous presentations, and I think in all such different ways. And the whole thing has just left me with this really awesome feeling of all the killer work that's happening out there. And that's my rah classic Lisa. But seriously, it was awesome. It was really, really nice to hear everyone.
I see Linda's got a question there, so I can respond to that if you like. Yes, Linda, there was all sorts of ideas around the concept. Like, imagine if you could take the card and slot it into something and it would play their favorite song, or it would have a clip from a concert that they attended, or it would show you a photograph of something, or maybe it would give you a smell of food, or, so there was all sorts of things that we could possibly take this. The photos and stories, definitely, but then it became a question of how do we go about embedding that? What is the interaction at that end with the family and their care at home, when the ultimate underlying thing is to make that meaningful connection with someone, right? So it was about having a conversation at a fundamental level. So while there's so much that the technology can allows now, it's also a kind of question of how far do we take that just because we can. At the other end of the interaction, we didn't want the information to be caught behind, uncharged tablets or passwords, or the focus to be on a screen and not on the conversation with the person with dementia. So there's a lot of kind of trying to balance what is kind of technically possible, and then and still maintain the kind of core concept of the card. But yes, lots of questions we'd like to explore. I hope that answered your question in a long way.
Looks like we got a question from Myrna. And Myrna, would you like to ask this question yourself?
So my question is this: I'm so excited by what everybody is doing. It just makes you feel damn good. But here's the thing: we have all these wonderful tools, and tools that are so great for helping so many people. But how do we actually get them used? we're talking about the cards, and that is so cool. And you're saying, but they're not really being used. And I know that's the case on so many great documents that would help so much when people went into care. But we should do a study then on finding out how can we ensure that when the documents are completed, that they go with the person to the care home and they're actually viewed.
Myrna, I think it's just such a good point. And I think it's something that a lot of us as designers who have done work in this area do really struggle with, is like, how do you take an idea and actually get it, into that sort of like real implementation and action phase. And I think probably something many of us are still, continue to strive for and try to figure out. I know in terms of the project that Lisa presented on, it's one of the reasons we're trying to work like so closely and so collaboratively with like the leadership level people at Vancouver Coastal Health, and to really like engage them in doing every step with us in hopes that that will help, move these things, forward so that they get implemented. But it certainly has its own challenges doing that as well.
I'd like to add further to Claire and Myrna's comment. I'm actually a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association in British Columbia, and I have a lived experience. My husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer, and I've had to live through this for many, many years with him, going through many, many institutions. And I can add to Claire about the cards, because I actually, my husband was very, very intelligent. He had a PhD in forestry, but he had frontal lobe Alzheimer and he couldn't communicate. So we actually benefit in the earlier years from an organization out of Vancouver, from CARA, and they were not really about dementia, but they were trying to assist people with communication. So what they did is they took photos of all the cards, like what you talked about all the meaningful moments. And a number of, I think the researchers have talked about all the meaningful moments of your life, your hobbies, your sports, your family, what you do. And they took photos of it and then maybe have a little snippet of story. They laminated it. And then at that time, they would put it into a binder. So then that became a history to communicate with somebody with, right? And or it was to point to, well, I want to go to the bus stop. I want to go to McDonald's. So they'll have a photo of McDonald's or all your favorite restaurants to communicate with. So that was kind of earlier on. And then as the illness progressed, we had binders, but then the binders weren't able to flip anymore, right? So then when you live in an institution, you get a very, very small room and space, and it was posted on the walls. And now at that time, they attach something with a sticker, attach it to the wall. So even though maybe at that time he was in between being able to communicate and not able to communicate, but what we would benefit from was, I think one of the researchers mentioned about the personhood, the dignity of the person, right? It wasn't the person that you see that was sitting in a wheelchair, not able to do anything, but it was this person with history and all the background. So that actually traveled with us to the end of his life. And that was very, very good. And so I do, I'm just a volunteer myself. So I encourage you guys to do more in that area. And I also want to encourage you, especially the younger people here, to leverage on technology, because I think that is so important. It saddens me a lot that, we have apps for a lot of things, right? If you lose your dog, you can use an app to find your dog. And every month here in Vancouver in Canada, we hear it in the news that you lose somebody and you can't find them and they end up dying, right? So anyways, I just want to share that with you, and just continue with the good work that you guys are doing, globally, obviously, and take it further. Thank you.
Oh, Linda, thank you so much for sharing that story and being brave to tell us all that story. I'm very sorry to hear that you had to go through that journey with your husband, but it seems that he had a very good level of care and people that recognized all of those wonderful things about personhood and how important that is.
Yeah,
In my experience, it was the same. Going into the room and having those photos, you would be able to say, oh, who's this? And oh, I knew you had kids. And it was just brilliant. But often it's the responsibility of the family and you have so much going on, you know.
Yeah. And I connect with what you guys are talking about, like Carolyn talking about, you know, the loop of all those facilities, and you need to give them space, right? And then you're not hitting a wall. And so I understand that. And it is so important from a design perspective, you know, of what it's like living in that area, right? That state. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. I know also, yeah, thank you for sharing that story in this virtual space too. It seems like conferences, especially when they're virtual, can seem very structured, and it's hard to have those kind of difficult emotional conversations. But I also lend this to, I'm sure, a lot of the workshops that have happened earlier in the week. There have been these really, really strong emotional conversations that I've had with a lot of people already, and I am so glad that we can still have that happen in this conference too. So thank you for sharing that. I see we've got some more questions come up and people have asked me to share them. So I'll go with the first one. I think this is for Carolyn. How do the staff manage agitation of residents that may also affect other residents in the care oasis?
Thank you very much for this question. That's kind of, I mean, this is maybe a provocative thing to say, but that's kind of the point of the care oasis. And if you were to ask Michael Schmieder, so like, how do you deal with that problem? He's like, it's not a problem because sounds that other people make are indications, reminders that other people are there. And that is very reassuring. I mean, the care oasis is really for people in the final stages of dementia. I mean, people aren't walking or talking. And I think the other thing that's really important to note is that there's this specific type of therapy approach that they use at the Sunvide, specifically in the care oasis, but also in other parts of the home. And they call it basale stimulation, which basically means sensory stimulation therapy. And it combines like all kinds of different kind of sensual experiences. So it combines massage with listening to music and like singing and a little bit of movement with aromatherapy. And this is like, it's a way to facilitate connection to the body, connection to one's own senses, and connection to other people. And I think that this approach is really important to answer your question because I think they would probably say like we try to get to the root of why that person is distressed or why they are experiencing discomfort, and address it through some kind of activity, some kind of motion, some kind of connection that they find calming. And I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but those are the two things that came to mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. We've got another one for you too. This one is from Allison. She said she's very intrigued by the Care Oasis as a shared space for people living with more advanced dementia, and is asking if there are any updates on what has happened since COVID, and how people are thinking about and using this space at this time.
Hi, Allison. Thank you for your question. So my last update is that there was no coronavirus in the Sunvide and that they were being very, very cautious, but that everything was running like, obviously like programs and visits and things were very restricted, but that otherwise things in the care home were running fine. But I don't have any more detail, and I'm sure there is more detail. So I'm gonna write on the board, on this community board, and I'll answer your question there once I have a little bit more information. Thanks. It's a really good question.
And there's another one. Michelle, would you like to ask this question, or would you prefer if I asked it out loud? Okay. Another one for Carolyn, kind of a follow-up. Is there anything like the Oasis in BC? I guess it's kind of a question for everyone, if anyone kind of has any knowledge about that. BC, Canada, I'm assuming.
I don't know about anything like the Care Oasis outside of Switzerland and Germany. Do you? Does anyone else?
I would just say, Carolyn, the reason I asked my question is because I'm so aware that in this time of COVID, everyone's saying, oh, it's only those terrible old homes that have shared rooms, and that a good home has only private rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to be learned about that idea of shared living space and hearing other people at the end of life. And I'm concerned that all of our focus on infection, and it's so important, but that we're coming into a space where maybe people won't even be able to hear what the kind of things that you're saying about a space like that.
Yeah, completely. And I think there's actually an interesting story behind the creation of the Care Oasis, because in the 90s, when they were coming up with this idea that privacy and individual rooms and everything, that's super important. And so Michael Schmieder had this idea, like, we're going to provide like top-notch care to people, like super individualized. Everyone's going to have their own room. And he told his nursing staff about his idea, and they were just like, no way. We are not doing that. That is the opposite of what people want. That is the opposite of what our residents need. And so he was like, okay, then what do we do? Because we have a problem. Yeah, I mean, there was kind of an event that caused this to happen, which is that like lots of residents died in 1 year. And he was just like, why is this happening? We need to find a solution. And the solution that they came up with was actually this Care Oasis, so that people could actually get higher quality care. And I mean, it's been a huge success at the Sonnenweide, which is why I think it's taken on in the rest of the German speaking world. But I think a little bit because of this like language divide, it hasn't maybe caught on as much in the English speaking world.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Allison, too, to sort of make that connection between like when we make decisions for infection control and sort of like what are the potential unintended consequences of that. I know it has come up in work I've done around like neonatal intensive care units where babies and families were all in one room. Now that they're all moving to private, and it just really changes the dynamic of families interacting with each other and getting support. So I can see how that kind of applies here.
Okay, we can just check the chat. Looks like Elaine, and I saw you say earlier that it's something like 3:30 in the morning for you, so I can go ahead and ask this for you if you'd prefer. But this is for Gail. Elaine is asking, I was wondering if you can share some of the reactions your audiences had to the VR experience. And Elaine is also saying that I have done other VR experiences similar to building empathy for those with dementia, and thought that it was very interesting, but I also came from a perspective of having lived experience with dementia.
Yeah, we've had a wide range of responses to the work, and partly that wide range is because of the different formats we have and where it's being viewed. So it was in a gallery as part of the Big Anxiety Festival, which was a festival held Sydney-wide, actually extended into New South Wales. And that festival was an arts festival that focused on mental health and well-being. And so the whole festival was about taking issues around health into the broader community and engaging with people who would not necessarily come forward with regards to mental health issues, finding out more about dementia, those types of things. So the people who experienced the work in the gallery space, it was very interesting because they sort of came across it. They didn't go necessarily to see it. They went to see a range of works. And then there's this sense of a little bit of confusion, a little bit of curiosity. Lots of people who had experience of dementia from family members. And what we found there, which was very interesting to us, a sense of an assumption in a way that, oh, my granddad had dementia, but he didn't behave like that. You know, and I thought dementia was about losing your memory. And so what we found was this very one point of view about what dementia was for some people who had experience of dementia. You know, it was just like my granddad, or he would wander off. There was curiosity about, you know, is this figure in the virtual work, you know, is she hallucinating? Is she telling a story? Some people thought that she couldn't have dementia because she was too articulate. She was able to describe things and able to describe, you know, intimate details about her life. But what we also knew from the researchers in this, that some of the stories that we were told by our participants were confabulations. You know, one of us told us this wonderful story of going to Egypt and traveling around Egypt. And nobody in her family and nobody she knows can ever verify that it happened. And so there's this, what we found is that people picked up on this sense of confusion. And this is partly what the work's about, is that this ambiguity. Is she talking to you? Is she talking to an hallucinated child? Is she aware of that she has dementia? And all of those questions came in. We showed this to, we did a really in-depth evaluation with a series of students who were probably from the age of 18 to 24. And that was really surprising because straight away they wanted to know the answer. They wanted to analyze this. What is dementia and what did she feel? You know, what was it that she had? And they really found it difficult of the ambiguity. They also found some of the stories that she was telling quite difficult because she talked about, there's a story where her one carer is only 23. She's so frail, she has no life experience. And the students' response to that was were quite horrified. How dare they suggest that at 23 we don't know anything? How dare she suggest that we have no life experience? And yet it was the very things that they were doing. These students also were psychologists and in a sense were very proud of knowing what empathy was and being able to empathize. But we had those sudden light bulb moments where somebody suddenly realized that I'm not empathizing, I'm pitying. And that sort of was a real shock. So we've had a wide range of reactions. Another very interesting reaction was from a group of people where some had dementia. So the age range there was from about 75 through to 83. Their response to the character was that she was very sad for herself. She was very sorry for herself. And really, she should just wake herself up and get out of this. And what we realized from the evaluation there is that this is what these people were being told all the time. That when they were in care facilities and they started to get a little bit down and I don't feel good today, somebody would say to them, oh, you don't worry about that. What have you got to worry about? Just, you know, chin up, smile, let's go and, you know, listen to music or let's do this. And they felt that they were not able to talk about the things that mattered. So it's brought out a lot of conversations and we're continuing to put the video and the VR in a sense on a festival, arts festival environment, taking it into care homes, taking it into schools to just see what sort of range of comments we get. So hopefully that gives you some of the insights. But I think the ambiguity and the being left of, I still don't know what dementia is. You know, I don't know how she's feeling, but perhaps I can try and understand rather than just know the answer.
Thank you, Gail. I've got another question from Elaine, and this one's for Emma. And this is about the lack of sensory via Zoom and engagement. Elaine is curious to know what you, Emma, have learned from your participation about how they feel about their level of engagement over Zoom, and do they feel the same level of engagement as in-person participation?
Yeah, hi, Elaine. That's a good question. How do I put this? We didn't exactly test. We didn't do like a comparative study and do one session in person and one remote to see, people's opinion on that. But I will say that all of our participants are very active in multiple support groups that are online and have been online since before COVID happened. They're international support groups. So they were very used to the Zoom interface and engaging with people over Zoom. So when we were talking to them and asked them specifically, did you enjoy this? What are your thoughts on this method? They were very positive because they're very used to, like I said, engaging with others and connecting over virtual or in virtual spaces. So for our specific participants, I want to say that it went well and they enjoyed it, but I don't know that that would be the same for other people that aren't on Zoom calls, regular.
Thanks, Emma. Are there any kind of final questions before we wrap things up for today? I'm going to post that the link to the bulletin board again in the chat. And if anyone ever has a question for someone or a comment, wants to share something, then you can go ahead and post on there and it'll be up there pretty quickly, and then people can comment as well. So it's a good way of sharing.
Yeah, it's under the news header on the website, and if anybody else has links to their research or other things, you can share that there.
Yeah, other than that, we've still got, I think, 9 more workshops throughout the rest of this week and then next week as well. We have more Paper Talk series. There's Paper Talk series B and C. We have the film Q&A. So I think I emailed a link yesterday, and there will be another one going out to watch the film by Ruud Lenson, Lost in Memories. And if you have time over the weekend to watch that, then there will be a Q&A on Monday.
And the keynote tomorrow morning.
Right, yes.
Morning for us.
Morning for us, yeah.
In 14 hours or something for everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Evening
Have a
or
good
day.